Welcome to Kindred OT TV. I have Jess Kennedy from My OT and Me and the Gabadoo Platform with me today. Hey, Jess.
Hi, how are you?
Good, thank you. So I've asked you to come on today to have a little bit of a chat about the work you've built with the Gabadoo platform and how we can think about scaling OT and providing more services to more people with the current wait lists and things like that. But I first want to ask you about, I read when I was sort of researching for our chat today, I read that the Gabadoo platform was named after GABA, the neurotransmitter. So start there for me and just tell me a little bit about, the Gabadoo platform and how it kind of came about.
Thanks, Lee. And yeah, I think I'm a bit of a, like many OTs, a bit of a neuroscience geek, and I love that area. And I suppose my OTME was my first kind of clinical practice, and that's where I was, driving around and doing home visits and, taking on any contract and doing a lot of community work and in schools. And I had just returned from Australia, so I was bringing everything and all these fresh ideas back here that I was loving. And I suppose over time, COVID hit, and I had, moved into a space of developing more online supports. I was doing lots of YouTube videos that were very popular, like tying shoelaces. I was, starting to kind of move into a space of coaching parents online that I couldn't really access in person. And that obviously kind of exploded then during COVID because I already was set up for that. And we had a product, Octobox, that was being sent out. So where Gabadoo came from was just, I suppose, the level of stress that I was encountering, both with teachers and with families and parents. And Sean, actually, my husband, who is in business development, he was looking at, I suppose, outside of the box, saying, well, how do you scale that expertise? How do we, reach more families? And so during COVID, we postponed our wedding and we started to grow Gabadoo, and we have an incredible software engineer. We built out the platform. It was initially actually for parents, and the whole name Gabadoo came from obviously GABA, the neurotransmitter that, helps us to down-regulate, to ease our anxiety at times. And it's also playful, Gabadoo, because we wanted it to show that kind of essence of OT. And really, our first creation was for families, so for parents that could get that expertise when they need it. And I suppose over time of um, getting feedback, pivoting, looking at the software, looking at how we can manage it, we have really moved into kind of the school space. Like I suppose primarily primary, which will be, when they go in at around 4 or 5, right up until they're around 12 or 13, we've seen a huge cohort of schools using it. And that's something that I can talk to you about, that we've really moved into a space around parent and teacher capacity, and how we've done that online through a coaching, consultative, interdisciplinary approach. And how we've received really positive feedback, because I had looked at a lot of the research that was coming out about, school-based occupational therapy, and even that universal approach of going in and supporting the teacher and then pulling the supports out after a period of time. But what schools were saying was we needed that urgent care. We needed that crisis care of, I have a need, whether that's about getting support around a pencil grasp or understanding fine motor needs or how to grade them. I want the support now, while this is fresh in my head, while this is applicable to this classroom environment. And I suppose even for parents, they were like, well, now that has changed since I really needed the support. Now this is the area, or that behavior has really grown to be more challenging. So that's where Gabadoo really came in. It was to run supplementary to services that were accessible, public and private. But it became that first point of call of, I need support, I need validation, I need to be heard, I need, a therapist that understands my situation. And so as a result, like, we're really working in that early intervention preventative space where when they need it, they can get that support. So I suppose the biggest thing in Ireland at the moment, particularly for schools, is we're sourcing that funding option. So we've been lucky enough this year, we've been able to secure some funding for particularly disadvantaged areas in Ireland, where it's been funded through the county council. It's been funded through kind of basically they're kind of like centers, hubs that provide funding for schools. So we're really hoping to expand on that because we know that budgets can be tight in schools and some schools have been privately funding it, but we can see the need for this. We can see where it's needed and what type of service is needed. And building capacity is just I particularly love this space. I come from a family, an extended family of teachers. My sister, both my parents, like all my cousins, they're all primary school teachers. And I think where my unique piece came in was I felt we needed to change as a profession. What was happening was a lot of therapeutic programs were being given to school staff to do without proper guidance and implementation. And
Mm.
it was creating a little bit of tension between therapeutic staff and school staff that felt like, well, this isn't my role. I don't feel trained to do this. And I do feel like you're offloading, you're making me be the occupational therapist, the speech and language therapist, whereas that was never what we have created with Gabadoo. What we've created is a space for the teacher or the parent to come along and really tell us their story, how they're finding it. So it might come down to, just helping them within their routine, within their capacity for change, as opposed to this is what you should be doing and reaming off a big list of things. So we're really trying to reframe the way that we provide therapy, that occupational therapy traditionally would have looked of this assessment, a block of intervention, the child being taken out of the class, the child coming to a clinic, to really moving it back into that space of natural environments, coaching, understanding well-being, supporting the adults that surround that child. And I'm really, really strong on that and maintaining that for Gabadoo. And it's why we haven't taken on big investment or anything like that, because we're trying to maintain the ethos of what the company was initially.
Mm. And I think on that, like a lot of people would who are in this model of one-to-one therapy, and you've done both. So you've gone from more of a one-on-one therapy to the Gabadoo platform. But people would be like, well, things change so often. When you're in a session, you can kind of, you can see everything that's going on. I guess when you weigh up the benefits of one-to-one therapy and even the taking out of class or kids coming to see you in another space versus capacity building where you're working only with the teacher and the parent. I guess my question is, does it weigh up in terms of like not having your eyes on the child the way that we would if we're seeing kids really regularly as a therapist?
I think that's where your clinical reasoning comes down. So I think a hybrid model works really well, but I don't feel it has to be that for every child. So there absolutely has been situations. So I would see certain children that are in care. I would see children with quite a significant developmental trauma history, let's say, or it could be a child has quite, prevalent or challenges in motor skills. So the teacher's like, look, I've really done what I can, but I just can't seem to, make gains, or I'd love you to see this child in person. Absolutely. Then we have a model of actually determining when a child may need to actually see an occupational therapist, when an occupational therapist needs to put eyes on a child, or absolutely where we're working as well is a space of a lot of neurodivergence, autistic children. It could be children that are within mainstream schools. I do think sometimes with physical disability, you do need an occupational therapist, sometimes to go out and view that situation and maybe show, demonstrate. Still, a lot of that can be done online,
Mm.
but I do think for the most part, it's about then determining who and what families need to be seen. And that's the problem. That's not going on. Whether it's public or private, everyone's just funneled into this one waiting list. So you've got children with pencil grasp challenges and children who need a new wheelchair potentially kind of sitting on waiting lists. And so they are now determining, okay, who needs to be seen quicker. But I do think there should be that level of, have we done capacity building? Now have we determined really what needs to be seen, Because,
Mm.
children do also remember being taken out. They do remember coming to a clinic. Children that I would have seen at 4 or 5 say, remember I used to come to your clinic, and only that I had really normalized it and been like, oh, other kids come here. They do think about those situations, and so unless it's articulated very well, it's really important that they haven't overheard conversations, that they didn't have a negative experience as well of being removed from class or feeling kind of isolated in it. So we are trying to move into a space as well of around listening to the child's voice and, being very inclusive in what we do. Now, I absolutely do think there's still a place for one-on-one, but I think that one-on-one needs to be the parents, maybe the teacher, the child, and the OT in the room, and everyone's still working together around, do you need me to demonstrate this? Let's have a look at this together, so you're seeing what I'm seeing. So that's still sharing of knowledge and capacity building, but maybe certain things do need to be done in person. And I am doing that still. There are
Yeah.
still situations where I'm like, no, I'm going to come out. I absolutely want to see this child. Or curiosity. Curiosity gets me. A parent's like, well, this is happening, or we just really can't get to the root of it. I'm like, okay, I really want to, put eyes on the situation and see what's going on. So I think
Yeah.
that's the beauty in the model, is that you have that scalability, but you also have that option of in person if it's feasible.
Yeah. And I think that's kind of what my thought was, is that, and what was really nice about what you just said was, it's almost like a triage process where everybody gets immediate or virtually immediate response, that validation, that here, people can be on wait lists here for, months and months, if not longer. And so, the people are getting an immediate response. They're getting something that they can at least be thinking about and working on, and in many cases could probably do quite well without an individual model. But then, for those kids who do require that more intensive, or the more eyes on and one-on-one occupational therapy, you can do that, but without having to go through a whole list of kids who may not necessarily need that approach. So I think that was really, really interesting that you'd spoken about. We have, like I just mentioned, really extensive waiting lists here in OT, in pediatrics, and probably in adults as well. But I wanted to talk to you about that, because essentially that's what has kind of motivated some of the work you're doing, that one-to-many, the scaling of OT services. If people are thinking about this model, I guess, what are some do's and don'ts, or what are some of the things you've learned along the way, or what are your key ingredients if people are going to think about this work?
So, I do think the first thing is education is massive. I've been doing so much education and reframing of this, that it isn't that I can't offer you in person. So this is an alternative. It's that this is what I'm offering, because this is what is important right now, and doing it online or doing it in person is the same, except I'll have more availability if we do it online. So I think that's the piece, is first to be really clear yourself on the research that's out there around telehealth, about, capacity building, that there is so much research there. And so it's being really clear on your own clinical reasoning, keeping in your lane, understanding what you're actually coaching around, understanding coaching, understanding what you're talking about. Because I suppose it's a different model to, oh, you're in front of me, now I'm going to relay as much information. You need to be very attuned to the capacity of who you're talking to. So you might have a parent who is a seasoned parent, who's done sensory integration workshops, who, then you really need to be attuned to, okay, what do you know already? What's working already? Let's work on that. So it's being very present. Yes, absolutely. You might have your process in your head around what I'm going to tell this parent, or, what I'm going to tell this teacher, but it's more so that collaborative piece. And what comes from that is, I think, what our training in mental health, that pause, that acceptance that you might not know the answer, and that you might need to kind of brainstorm together within the session, and that's okay. So it's the first piece, is that education piece around being very clear about the benefits of this type of approach. The second thing then, I think, is that education piece around reframing what the parents thought, and getting them bought into it. So it can be like, let's try it once. Let's see how you find it once, and let's go from there. So it mightn't be like, this is it, we're pivoting, we're not offering anymore. You might need to offer a hybrid for a while. And that's what I've had to do a little bit. I've had to offer some in person, some online, so that parents feel like, okay, this is actually working for us. This works really well. And it's interesting, in the space of 6 months, we went from pivoting away from parents, because I suppose they needed so much education and hand holding at that stage, because they were even finding it really difficult to know, like, what am I looking for here? OT, maybe we don't advocate well enough for us. They were like, I don't really know what I'm kind of sourcing. So for therapists going into it, do offer those consultations to parents, even just to brainstorm, what are we going to discuss during this time? what will we use this time for that would be really helpful. But I think that's a piece that sometimes is lost. You get straight into the intervention piece and the parent might not be ready. They're like, what are we actually doing during this time? The other thing I would say is to be, to use your time, use software that's available. I suppose with Gabadoo, we were lucky enough to build out our own software, which is such a nice addition to it. So we do the consultation, but afterwards, then we have a platform where we fill out a plan for that parent. We attach in videos cutting through lingo like co-regulation, proprioceptive input that we've done, and then that gets sent to the parent or gets sent to the teacher. So it's a lovely way to document, but also to really emphasize what have we discussed during our session. The other thing I would say is less is more. Sometimes when we first get into this, we're like, okay, what else is going on? What else is going on? You're trying to get to like 5 or 6 different things. Actually, clarity is probably one of the biggest things that I've been doing on these calls, being like, okay, let me listen to your story. Now let me prioritize. We're actually going to talk just about regulation and what that looks like and what self-regulation looks like. And rather than, okay, we talked about regulation, now let's get on to fine motor. It's trying to peel it back and slow things down. Some of the parents that come on are so complex, the situation, and you think this is not for them. I need to go out there, but it is for them because sometimes within the complexity, it could be, well, actually, I just really want to work on wiping after the toilet, or I'd love some strategies on, maybe how to do a little bit of adult-led learning to use the toilet, or it could be we can simplify those goals. And that's the beauty of OT. And we haven't done, I honestly don't think in Ireland in particular, we have not done well enough at advocating what we do. When I talk to schools, they're like, I can't believe this is OT as well, that you work on this, you work on that, you work on regulation, you understand attention. So it's that piece that I think I would love for OTs, particularly OTs that have long waiting lists, to do, advocate for the profession, spend some time even doing that, and so it might feel like, oh, do I need to be doing this? But do offer, webinars or sessions, or, put yourself out there kind of saying, did you know that OT also works on this, and that we can have lots of spokes on the wheel. And part of that can be intermittent check-ins face to face, but we can also do parent capacity online. And soon I think you'll see a reduction waiting lists, because we all fall into a routine of going somewhere. Okay, so parents might bring a child to a clinic, they drop them off, they feel like, look, tick box, they're going to OT. Whereas really you do see a lot happen when you have the parent has to designate that time to really focus on what you're talking about. Sometimes they'll say, you know what, I actually don't think we need to check in for another 8 weeks or another 10 weeks. And suddenly you're shifting that routine into actually what do we actually need, as opposed to, well, we've always just done this. We've always gone to OT and speech every week. And that's just become almost like an extracurricular that's going on. It's to really sit and reflect and feel confident that we don't always need that level of intervention.
Yeah, I really like what you said about advocating for OT and, what we can be providing and what we can be working on, because, and I remember back to, I think it was like Camp Jabberoo, maybe in 2007, it was a really long time ago, and I did the practicum with that. So Camp Jabberoo is like an Australian camp with colleagues from the Sensory Gym. Anyway, Tracy Stackhouse was one of the mentors on as part of the practicum, and I remember to this day her talking about how we need to be able to articulate really clearly what OT is and what OTs can do to give our profession dignity and to be able to stand on a platform alongside other health and allied health professionals and own that space of what we do. And so hearing you talk kind of took me back to that because it stuck with me. And I mean, we're in 2024, so it was nearly 20 years ago. So yeah, it's really important information. But I want to ask you, the things you're describing requires quite a high level of clinical reasoning to be able to prioritize, to be able to take a holistic situation where somebody's sharing all of this stuff and go, okay, let's break this down, and experience, of having that confidence and working with, a whole range of people, because like you said, some families are really complex, and and some parents are really complex, not just the kiddo. And so would you recommend I mean, we see people going straight into private practice from uni here, largely because of what we spoke about earlier with the funding situation here now. It's really largely privatized. Um, and starting their own private practices, which I mean, I probably wouldn't be recommending for lots of reasons. But in a situation like what you're talking about, where you're trying to build capacity in somebody else, yeah, what are your thoughts around that? Do you have, I think your therapists all have a minimum of 3 years. Yeah, can you sort of share to that around the experience that's required if you're going to do this type of model?
To be honest, the therapists that are actually working on our platform have nearly 10 years experience, to be honest, like who have actually, who my speech language therapists and OT that are, really working. And that is something that I have looked at and really changed, is that anyone that's doing this has not only life experience, but also, a lot of clinical experience, like you said, in diverse kind of areas. So absolutely, like when I was working in Australia, I worked in so many different kind of settings as well, that when I came back, I absolutely could have gone straight into private and thought, oh, but I didn't. I worked in a clinic for a couple of years where I learned like the do's and don'ts, and I really ran groups and I went out to centers and I did one-on-one intervention. And you need that grit, you need that graft, you need to be under people, even if it's a brilliant supervisor or it's a not so great supervisor. It's all learning experience, because you go away from it improving your own clinical reasoning, understanding where you need to do more learning. And so what I would say is, when you first come out of uni, do that graft, like take on roles that you might necessarily take on roles that if you don't have responsibilities, if you don't have a chick or a child, it's even easier. So you can be doing that diverse placements, seeking out those opportunities to really figure out like what's going to be a right fit, as opposed to I suppose looking where the money is going as well. So you are, as much as possible, if you can't find absolutely a job in the area that you feel, oh, I'm going to get a lot of experience, and you do end up in private, seek out that supervision, but also be very clear on what you are offering private. So it could be that you're offering handwriting groups, you're reviewing motor skills, you're working within your capacity. You're not doing, feeding assessments and toileting in areas that you might not have expertise in. And be very clear on that. Say, well, I actually don't have as much experience as another occupational therapist, so I can do this area with you, but I will have to upskill in another area or seek supervision to be able to support that. So I think it's making sure you're being very clear on where your training is at. And the one thing I can say is, some people say, well, no, like I can't admit that because then I don't look like I have enough experience, but it will kind of come back to you in a
Yeah,
couple of years time. You'll think, oh, I did so much unlearning because I just didn't know any better. And there's so much information out there now. When like I trained, it was literally what my supervisor told me. Like I didn't really have access to the same level of, like, when we started running things, even your brunches and stuff, I thought this is opening up unreal. Like online really opened up for OT. We could learn from Kim Barthel on a weekly basis. We could learn from, it changed my practice, like literally changed my practice. But before that, it was literally what we knew. So all of us did a lot of unlearning. It had to happen because we learned from supervisors that some of the stuff was a little bit archaic, and, definitely when it comes to autistic populations. But now, it's different. There's such a freedom of information that you have that information. So you might come across as very knowledgeable, but clinical reasoning comes with time. You just can't rush it, and that ability to pause and process and take on and listen and actually attune to what's going on, that takes practice and it takes time and it takes life experience. Now, some therapists are ready after 3 years of intense intervention, a lot of really clear, very good processing speed, high emotional intelligence. Maybe they don't have a history of trauma themselves. These things do help in situations. Whereas for other therapists, it takes a lot longer. They might need to go to counseling themselves. They need to work on different areas. They need to kind of pivot into different spots to figure out what works for them. So it's a very individual process, like it is for any therapist. And I think sometimes OT gets a little bit lost in the tangible goals that can be seen. So tying shoelaces and handwriting, and and I think that's where educators are surprised by Gabadoo, that, hold on a second, I thought you were going to tell me about adaptions in the classroom, but you're actually bringing me into a space before learning, in that readiness to learn space. You're talking about
mm,
attachment, you're talking about regulation. Probably my biggest job is educating staff to think in a different way. So instead of saying, okay, you're getting stuck in the behavior, how about we look at it from a different lens? I want you to look at it from the lens of this child is stressed, there's a lot going on at home. Like, how would you approach that child now, as opposed to, the child that's been behavioral in a class of 30? And so it's that confidence to be able to articulate that to someone else. And just to give people, like, I'm 33. I have a 18-month-old. I'm not like a seasoned parent, I don't have like 5 kids, but I've really tried to, listen and, adapt and apologize and repair if I feel like actually I just learned something from you and that's been really helpful, so it's okay to be open to that. We're all constantly learning, constantly changing.
Yeah, it's so interesting. I think that being transparent about your skill level, and not and because that is such a big battle, um, for, well, not just new therapists, just for people and therapists, to that feeling of you're not enough, you're not doing a good enough job, I don't know enough. And so to be able to say, I don't have this expertise in that, or it can, I think that's a really confronting thing to be thinking about. You know what I mean? Like,
Oh, it's really confronting. And like for
yeah,
people, I think this is really important. So
yeah,
I it really comes down to relationship, not actually expertise. Because when I first came back from Australia, I worked in a clinic and I did not have any to the same level of clinical reasoning as I do now. But I was just very open at the time. And it was easier for me because I was within a clinic. But I was like, I don't really have experience, but I'll upskill on that. But I really worked on my relationship. Those clients are still my clients to
yeah,
this day. They
yeah,
still contact me. Those kids are now in secondary school. They still say they remember that time with you. They constantly talk about that time with you. They said, why don't you ring Jess? She'll know what to say to school. Like that is the relationship I have with them. And I was a totally different therapist. But my essence of co-regulation and being present in relationship has always maintained. And I have honestly very rarely had a client not come back to me to say, oh, remember, I know you saw them when they were a child. Is it okay if we link in? So I think
mm,
it's to work more on that. Parents will come back to you, even if you say, look, I don't have experience in toileting, but they like you. You have a good rapport, you have a good relationship. They feel you're honest, you have their best interest. They will come back. They absolutely
yeah.
will.
Yeah, and that you're there, you're showing up, listening, validating their experience, and just like you say, being present, giving that time. But yeah, it's a big feeling of that, just not, yeah, not feeling that confidence in yourself. On that topic, well, sort of, the other theme in OT or in health at the moment is just this whole concept of burnout. And I think some of that's been created by this like intensity in private practice here, but I think it's global. I think maybe I'm not sure how the evolution has resulted in that, but do you feel this model, obviously it's more efficient, more effective in many ways for families and teachers and the kids? Do you feel like it has that same positive benefits for therapists? Does it slow things down for therapists? Is that efficiency, does that translate to the therapist as well? Is it creating less burnout? Yeah, I don't know. I just had that thought.
No, absolutely. And I think it's such an important point because particularly in the public system here, therapists are funneling out of the profession. The issue here is a lack of satisfaction in the role. It's turned into a lot of admin, a lot of assessment. Parents are unhappy with the service, they're waiting too long. By the time they see them, these are brilliant therapists, but they're nearly burnt out from the process by the time. And it's not even just a burnout physically from doing too many sessions, which is happening in the private system, where you're going from one session to the next and you don't even have time to think. I've been in that situation and that I would never have lasted. And I think I did like 5 years or something. And then it was like, okay, now I'm ready to do something different. I would think with OT, we're often quite creative, like problem solvers. We're often people pleasers, like we're attuned to kind of wanting to do good and make a difference. I think variety is the key, and just having that variety. So doing a bit of, webinars or education, doing other kinds of work. Like I still get contracted into certain services like Down Syndrome Ireland. I do a bit of work there, which is kind of in clinic, it's in a team. I do, some in person. I check in with teenagers online. I do my school consults. So there's a lovely variety in it. And I really have had to focus on that balance of my time and what's important to me. So like our profession is dominated by by women, many of which are mothers, you know. And so it really is thinking differently about our work day as well, of going, I want to utilize my skills and my expertise without it feeling like I'm either full-time or part-time or I don't work. And when that's the option, they're just funneling out of the profession here. Whereas I suppose with a model like ours, it's like, okay, I could do 3 hours on a Thursday. That works for me because I have childcare, and I can still like use my expertise. And these people are really wanting my expertise. And so that's the piece that like it was actually, it really saddened me. Like when I looked into this, how many therapists had left the profession who had unbelievable expertise, like in clinical reasoning, who were
Mm.
specialists in areas. And I was like, I want to use that. I want to use that skill, like that we can use it on the platform. And, you know, so I do think being able to stay at home, set up an office, go on for a couple of hours, like real core work, real intervention work. We're making change, you're listening, you're problem solving, you're using your brain, you're using your expertise. This is the type of work that I love, and I know a lot of therapists love. And I think that's the piece that you have to be very true to yourself and going, you know, maybe I may need to take a change in how much I earn, but this is going to make a big difference in my satisfaction, my work-life balance, how I feel about what I do. And I suppose like I've been working for myself now in private practice for, you know, a number of years. I've been in private practice for since I graduated, 12, you know, 13 years or whatever. And I still love what I do. Absolutely love it. I couldn't imagine changing out of it. And I've always been in, you know, children and young people. And I think the biggest reason for that is I'm okay at switching it up. Changing it up, trying to kind of graft and move into different areas. But for therapists who feel like I won't be able to do that, that's why we've created Gabadoo, is a space for therapists that they could say, thank you for creating the boundary around it. So I won't be getting calls in the evening from a parent or a school, but that I could use my expertise for a couple of hours. And look, we do see this, like we're doing our progress because it's healthcare. We want to do work on Ireland, see does it work. But we're looking at other spaces, Australia, you know, these spaces where a software like Gabadoo could work. So a clinic or, you know, a center could say, okay, we have Gabadoo, meaning that we can do that blended hybrid approach. So if we get a cancellation, pop on, work with a parent online
Mm.
during that time. Or, you know, someone's coming in, actually, I'm kind of burnt out on a Thursday evening. I'm just going to do two online as opposed to I just can't see any clients on a Thursday afternoon. So it's managing that regulation for therapists as well, so that it's saying that we don't have these blocks booked in and they're not movable. That, you know, we do those check-ins, we do online, we have that blended approach to how we work. And I think, you know, even the fact that I don't have to sit in traffic or move with the crowds at busy time periods makes a difference to my mental health. And I know for mums, if they could start an hour later and get kids kind of ready in and get them co-regulated and then kind of set themselves up, it just makes such a difference to your day. So, you know, I think that's the place that we need to move. And sometimes public services are slow to move on those kind of flexible schedules. But that's where I think we have like an opportunity private wise to do that and to model that practice, how it can be effective.
Yeah, it's interesting because that's sort of the model that um, that I'm using in my private practice, but it's taken me a lot longer than you to come to that, to get to that point of yeah, realizing having that you can do all these different things and mix it up,
Mm.
and it might come at a sacrifice to your income or whatever, but it's not actually always about that. There's that led um, heart-led therapy. This is what's actually going to fill my cup in other ways. And like this week, yesterday, I was at a Human Rights Commission for Indigenous Affairs. It was like a roundtable meeting with the Human Rights Commissioner for Indigenous Affairs and local Indigenous people, and they were sharing all of their key concerns and what issues they have locally. And I was invited to that, and it was amazing. I'm online with you today. I worked with the police earlier today. Sorry, I'm online with you tonight, working with the police earlier today. I'm off to a little workshop with some people tomorrow on FASD. And in there, I'm doing some functional capacity evaluations. And so that I feel the same way. Most of that is just work that makes me feel so alive, and some of it doesn't. But for the most part, it's that mixture and that being able to provide my expertise in all these different angles and contribute from that vast knowledge of OT is just yeah, really, it's exactly what you just said, but it's taken me like 2 decades to get there. So I really love that you shared that with whoever's going to listen to this. And just remind me what time it is, because I know you do have an appointment after this.
No, you're fine.
We're
It's only
okay.
10. We're good. Yeah,
Great.
absolutely.
Okay. I might just ask a couple more things.
Yeah.
The final thing on the topic of Gabadoo is, can you share like just a case? Oh, I always ask this question, just a case or a, just a family or a school or just an incident that just comes to mind that you just, feel so good about because it just kind of epitomizes the work that you do.
Mm. So I think, do you know what? There's been so many situations. Sometimes you don't always get the feedback, and it's only when I reach out, they're like, "Oh, that was a brilliant session. Like it was so helpful," you know? So I think that's the hard part. Sometimes we don't hear, if we don't hear back from them, we're like, "Is that a good sign?" But I had actually a teacher reach out to me, and she was saying that she has been in SEN kind of that area, so supporting children with additional needs in school, in mainstream school for about 20 years. And she was saying, that she couldn't get over how she'd always heard the information about de-escalating and going into a meltdown and co-regulation, but never really kind of, I suppose, that implementation piece. And so on the call, we had chatted about a situation where a child had become overloaded in school, had a meltdown, and I was talking to them about what they did to give me the context. I want to picture this scenario. So they were saying, we reinforced, we showed visuals and we were offering supports, and we were there with the child, and we instructed them out of the class to a safe place, and there was all this going on. So I took a step back and said, okay, how overloaded was this child? And I just said, the next time this happens, I want you to speak less. So less is more. So don't engage in language. Instead, just sit. We talked about holding space, and I know Kim and everyone talks about that a lot, but I was actually modeling for them, what that would look like. What would they do with their body? Where would they sit? And we were talking about how to keep that child safe and other people safe, and how to be really self-regulated in that moment to try and shift that arousal state to then, when they felt, because they had a great relationship with this child, it was shifting to then instruct them to the sensory room or introduce sensory tools. So I got this lovely message. She was like, I can't get over the fact that I've been in this 20 years and I did less. And that child was able to shift out of that meltdown and maintain their regulation in school for the rest of the day because we hadn't exasperated. They didn't realize they were being the dysregulator in it. And I thought it was such a lovely admission as well from such an experienced teacher to say, I can see that I'm unlearning in these moments because this isn't really their expertise, and that is a hard area to understand. And I think getting that message reinforced as well, that sometimes when we are saying this, less is more, and it sounds very kind of wishy-washy nearly, don't say anything, just sit there. But like these are really core concepts of regulation that we need to emphasize over and over again, model, talk through situations rather than just saying it isn't good enough. We need to really like talk it through. So got a big long message just talking about how they had been going around saying this to all the other teachers and the staff, reinforcing it, and that everyone was kind of changing the ethos in the school, shifting from kind of compliance into more regulation. So I suppose, look, that's been, I think the experience of a number of schools that we've been working with over the last couple of months. And it's lovely to see that it isn't localized to one situation, that we're kind of changing maybe ways throughout the school, whole school approaches to behavior. And that's been a hard one because I couldn't get over until I started doing the work how very strong behavioral approaches had infiltrated all schools, particularly the autism classes here, and how it was kind of the go-to in terms of identifying triggers, stopping or changing the behavior. And so I've been doing a lot of education around actually regulation, regulatory approaches and attunement and validation, as opposed to, always feeling that the behavior has to stop. It's trying to get to the root of that. And that is a slower process, but it is probably one of the most meaningful work that I've done.
Yeah. Oh, it's so fascinating, and I can just hear how experienced you are with it, but how passionate you are about it. And like, I'm sure when it started, and which I think we met, well, with the OT branch, but I think we met around the time when it was almost in its infancy. Would that be true? Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And
Yeah,
it
it
kind
was.
of was, this service for parents to, kind of beat, these wait lists and get some early
It was
intervention
kind of like an
in. And it
advice
was,
center, wasn't it? It was like an advice center nearly. It was like,
yeah,
"Here, come on, get a bit of advice." And
right.
yeah, so you just thrown it out, I guess.
Yeah, so just to hear you speaking, and it's just like this, because I mean, how long ago was the OT brunch? Was like really early on in the online OT thing. Like I think I think so. I just can't really recall what else
No,
was
it
going
was
on.
like it's a good few years ago. Like it must be four.
Yeah,
Was
well,
it?
it was in COVID. It was during COVID,
Yeah.
and it sprung from I think I did the whole child lens. Did you do that? Is that how come
Yes.
you did? Yeah, that was just so
Yes.
random and so cool. And then everyone was like, "Oh, that was so awesome." It was like sitting around a dinner table with these like
Yes.
experts and cool people. And then Kai and I were talking. I was like, I want to do more of that. It was so fun. So similar to what we're talking about, this novelty and just doing different things and seeing a gap where people might be able to learn or hear from different people, which is why we did the whole child lens, why I did the whole child lens. And then, everyone's like, oh, that was so good. It was like so casual, but I learned so much just from listening to conversation. And I really believe storytelling is one of
Yes.
the best
Yeah.
ways to, I remember teaching at uni and it's another little thing we do. And I was, had the PowerPoint presentation, and I was just telling a story about, and they're like, "Oh, just tell us more stories, tell us more things."
That's what it
And
is. But it
it's
is. It's that case
storytelling.
study. Yes,
Yeah,
storytelling. They don't
yeah,
do enough of it. And I think
yeah.
actually it's something that everyone learns better from. I've done it with a lot of educators as well, of listen to this story, what do you think of this? And I do think that's really important to remember. Yeah.
Yeah. And storytelling's so ancient. I mean, we hear stories from,
Mm,
from ancestors and from, it's really, anyway. And I think, we get caught up in the facts and the stats and the, what do they call the metrics? And,
yes.
but it's actually the stories where people, I mean, I don't remember stats. I'm sure I know that there's imbalances here and there's issues there, but it's the
Mm.
stories. Like, even yesterday, listening to people's stories and what their experiences are, it was way more powerful, and I could listen so much more deeply than listening to the stats on how many kids are in out of home care, or it's important, absolutely, otherwise we don't have funding in those areas. But it was just, I think storytelling is so important. Finally, I did notice on Instagram, and correct me if I'm wrong because I just saw it as a post, but that you're offering some more mentoring and for people who are wanting to do more capacity building. Is that right? That's what I said. Please correct me, but that was kind of what I was gauging. Before you go, can you share about that and just where people might be able to engage and what it's all about? And just share away.
Yeah, so I think anyone like, particularly any therapists that are like interested in this space, or even if you're, a therapist and maybe you're the director of a clinic, and you're like, how do we maximize on this? Do reach out to us absolutely through the website, or you can email support@gabadoo.com as well. You can follow us on Instagram, myotme or Gabadoo Platform, and I share loads of bits there. And also just to kind of listen into the conversation. Sometimes videos that I post are kind of just challenging, I suppose, what I'm seeing, and also I'd love you to share kind of your comments and expertise under it. So do reach out. I'm always really happy to kind of hear from therapists who want to move into this space, but also maybe thinking about how maybe Gabadoo can support you in your own kind of clinical practice, because we will be looking at how we can expand out of Ireland as well. And sometimes we might need just those people on the ground to say, well, actually, this would really work and this is how it would work here. So yeah, that'd be greatly. And feel free to always reach out to me. I love kind of hearing from people and chatting with them.
Yeah, I've really enjoyed getting to know you. And like I said, it's just time flies. You've been married and had a baby and renovating a
No.
house, and you've exploded Gabadoo from this little mini thing to something global and incredible. And but yeah, it's always really nice to talk to you. And it's just it's been really great. So thanks for jumping on. And just sharing this. It was, I think anyone who listens would definitely be thinking about in the current climate we're in with private practice and wait lists and burnout and not really always reaching the people that we need to be reaching. It's really important information. And thanks so much for sharing it in such a meaningful way to everybody today or tonight.
Thanks so much for having me, Lee. No, 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 it was great. Really, really love chatting about it. And I've always learned so much from anything that you've shared over the years. So it's great.
Thank you. I appreciate that. All right. Well,
Okay.
I'll end the recording and then I'll say a proper goodbye. But thanks so
Okay.
much. Thanks again.
Okay. Bye, Lee.
Bye.